Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March edition of the Music is Education webinar. Thank you all for being here with us tonight, whether you're joining us live or watching the recording after. We're thrilled to have you with us today as we are talking around the topic of using your platform, making your case for music education. We will explain a lot about what that means with someone who knows a lot about using her platform to share the values of music and arts education. So what we'd like to do starting off is we want to know who's here. We want you to introduce yourself. So if you could take a second in the chat to introduce yourself, let us know who you are, what state you're from, and what your role is in your state. We'd appreciate that. So, as I said, this is the March edition of the Music is Education webinar. And as you all know, as music education advocates, March is Music in Our Schools Month. We're so excited that we'll be talking a little bit about that later, but we wanted to just mention that right off the top to remind you it is Music in Our Schools Month. There's a QR code on the screen right now. You can take a look at that. Go to NAFME's website to learn more about Music in Our Schools Month. But later in the webinar, we're going to be talking a little bit more about Music in Our Schools Month and ways that you can get yourself involved. So, as I said, what we're talking about today is using your platform to support music education. And we have someone with us who uses her platform all the time. In fact, had to formally create a platform. She's Cassie Donegan. She is Miss America 2026. And she is going to talk with us about her background in music education, what it meant to her. And then a little bit later, we're going to actually dive into how she created her platform. And we're going to use that as a workshop so that you can work on your own individual platform. So what we're going to start doing, start the webinar with doing, is playing an interview that we pre-recorded with Cassie. And as you're listening to the interview, we would like you to identify any keywords or moments that resonate with you. And feel free just to put those in the chat as you're watching the recording. And we'll talk a little about that afterwards. But let's go right to this video right now. And you're going to hear about Cassie, how she came into music education, and her platform. We are here with Miss America 2026, Cassie Donegan, and let me bring her in here. Cassie, thanks for joining us.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
We are excited to have Miss America as a music and arts education champion.
Yes, yeah, it's been a big part of my life for all of it. So I'm very grateful to have this platform to be able to amplify that message more.
So that's what we want to dive into here in the next few minutes. So I want to hear a bit of the backstory as well. So let's start there. What was your background in music education?
Yeah, so I think I had a little bit of an odd one in terms of how long I've actually had access to the educational element behind it. So I did my very first musical at only 4, and that really, it just stuck. And so I was very blessed to have access to scholarship opportunities, to be able to have extracurricular access to those lessons. So I actually started taking voice lessons at only 4 years old. And so I have been training in voice for majority of my life consistently. I'm very grateful for that reality. And I had a really incredible basis of understanding of how to use my instrument, that it was an instrument within me, and the mechanics behind it. I had some exceptional teachers throughout my life who have really helped me understand the actual how-tos and the fact that we are really having to, we can't replace our voice, right? We get those vocal cords once. And so how do we take care of those and train them like an athlete would any other muscle? And so I'm very grateful for that. And then that journey continued on to then beginning classical training around the age of 10 and 11 years old. And I'm very thankful for that too, because I had that training as a through line through my vocal changes as I got older, which was huge for me to know how to maneuver my instrument in that time in a healthy way. understanding the actual musicality and musicianship behind what I was doing. And then I went on to study collegiately. I went to Belmont University in the musical theater program. But within Belmont's programming, it's actually in the School of Music, not the School of Theater and Dance. So we were technically classical voice majors. So those first 2 years of study are heavy on classical voice training, as well as your musical theater training, as well as all the other elements of getting a bachelor's in music, essentially. While it was still a BFA, we were on very similar tracking to those of a BM, which, again, very grateful for that, because I think there's a really big difference when you're a singer versus when you are utilizing another instrument. Of sometimes we can lack that training out of not understanding it's a necessity of the actual musicianship of being a musician as a singer. I think we sometimes accidentally separate those two things in our brains when really they're the same. And so I'm grateful that I have had that background of not just understanding my voice, but understanding music as well, and how those two marry in those settings. And so, yeah, it's served me very well having that access to that music education now as an educator myself, but also still as a professional performer, being able to pull from some of those things I learned even still in just elementary school, as well as, aside from being a singer, I played a few instruments growing up. I do play piano, not as talented as some do. I will say I play enough to be an educator to my littles. And so I can plunk out those notes. I can teach them their music theory, but I am no professional at the piano, I will say. But I did take that for a while. I took violin for a while as well. But my primary instrument from middle school all the way through high school was played the tuba in our orchestra. So I did actually play some instruments other than just utilize my vocal instrument as well. And all of them have always brought me so much joy.
I guarantee if you would have played tuba as your talent, like they would have just said, all right, we're done. She's it.
Right?
We don't
Yeah.
have to do anything else.
Game over.
Game over. That's right. She's in. We don't have to, no other words are necessary. All right. So I love that. I mean, just what a diverse, set of music education experiences you had, that, and you even kind of encapsulated how it did set you up in some ways for success. But could you dive into that a little bit more? How did music set you up for success? What skills did you take away from that, that you can actually even identify that you still use today?
Oh, a ton. I mean, I think especially when being a singer, I've always had to be so in tune with my body, because the second something feels off, that does directly affect my voice, right? And so having to have a lot of self-awareness of what's going on, of really honing in and asking yourself, okay, is this my mind playing tricks on me, or is there something wrong, right? So self-awareness in that respect. Also a lot of discipline. So much of what we do, even when we are in large participation spaces like a choir or an orchestra or a band, and it's multiple players participating together, we still have to go home. We have to have the discipline to hone in on those skills independently. And I think that's huge. But with that comes also the skill of delayed gratification, especially in a time where we want instant gratification, in a time of social media and, same day delivery, things of that nature. It's really easy to lose sight of how great something can feel when you've worked so hard for so long at it. And then finally that gratification of whether it's mastering that skill or doing that performance, whatever it looks like. I think that's a huge skill that music and the arts as a whole really teach young people or people of any age, because you have to work at it. Yes, it comes easier for some, but we all still have to practice. We all still have to hone in on those skills. But I think one of the most important is listening, right? We cannot possibly participate in any ensemble work of any size without actively listening to one another and making sure that what we're doing is complementing what's happening around us. And even if it is a one-person performance, you typically are working alongside of technicians or producers or instructors that you are having to listen to, take that guidance from, take that constructive criticism from. And I think these are all skills that are applicable whether music is your profession or it's your passion. You can then copy and paste those things into whatever that profession may be outside of the musical world.
So as you have been going through this Miss America journey, I didn't prep you for this question, but as you've
Okay.
been going through this journey, you've been actually performing. I saw you were singing at the Super Bowl. I think it was at the Uber One party. I saw.
It was at
So
the Taste of the NFL.
yeah, so like you're doing these. I would presume these performances in places and stages that you had not prior to this role.
Yeah.
You know, what is that like for you? What is that feeling like that you're up there? Is there like extra nerves now, or is it you just use that training you already have?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. So it's funny because I've had the honor in my career to sing on some pretty big stages with some pretty incredible people. And that, for some reason, process is different in my brain. It feels like a much more controlled setting, if that makes any sense, especially in the context of musical theater, right? This is a very curated entity. And not to say these other things are not, because they obviously are from a production standpoint, but there are so many other elements that come into play that are variables you cannot really control in those settings that are not necessarily there in some of our more controlled musical settings, right? And so I think that's where some of the nerves come in, but that's when I have to rely on the skills that I have built and pull from my tool belt. I mean, for example, I sang at the Daytona 500. Insane, like so exciting. I grew up in a NASCAR loving family, so that was huge for me to be able to do that. But variable I couldn't control was, for some reason, I had sound feeding into my in-ears of every other person's headset. So depending on where they were standing throughout the track, their feedback, their clapback of my delay was a different time.
Oh my.
So now I'm hearing like 3 different echoes of me in my ear. So I'm just having to trust my inner metronome and the fact that I started in the key that I normally start in and stick with that and pray and hope for the best. And so it's things like that. But then you add in the element that I have this internationally known brand across my heart and a crown on my head. And does add a little bit of a layer of more nerves because I'm not just representing myself as a musician. I'm representing a 104-year legacy of other women, right? And so it can be a little bit more nerves than normal can be there, but it's all exciting and it is a test to leaning and relying on the skills that I have built over my years of being in music education and being a professional within the industry. And I'm thankful for the education that set me up for success in some of these settings.
Right. Oh, I love that backstory. Fascinating. Okay. So we mentioned off the top that your platform is music and arts education. So like, tell us like what the elevator speech is of your platform. Somebody says, hey, what's your platform?
I think the biggest thing I will say before I give the elevator is that I'm often asked, and I'm sure everyone, here in this space has heard this and knows, well, why do we need to find funding for that, right? The core of what I do is arts education accessibility within our public school systems and standing on the grounds that every single young person is owed their right to a robust educational experience that includes arts education. So sometimes I throw the elevator pitch out the window because the question I'm being asked is, well, why do we need funding for that? And sure, I could give you that entire elevator pitch. I can give you the stats. I can give you the whatever. But you're asking me why? Well, our youth are our why. So me giving you an answer is kind of irrelevant, right? They're owed it. So figure it out. Now, I understand that often means reallocation or conversations that maybe you don't want to have about certain numbers, but it has to happen. So how are we going to do it? The why are our children. That's not up for debate. End of discussion, right? That's how I kind of feel about it is children don't pick their home life. They don't pick their zip code. They don't pick their economic status. So none of that should matter. It shouldn't matter where you happen to be living, the home you happen to be born into. You deserve the same equitable access to education as your peers, wherever they may live, right? And so that's, I can give you the modified elevator pitch, but that's usually the point that I think is the most important is I can give you all the things you want, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you agree with it or not. We have to.
Right. Yeah. So I was going to ask you that, the how you came to this, but I think you've encapsulated that very much. And part of it is like you're thinking of that end user, you're thinking of the students, and that's the why, which then is the reason you have the platform, and that's how you got to that. So, talk to us about then how you're using this platform in your role.
Yeah, so I'm very blessed that I get to encounter so many people every single day as Miss America. And I've worked in the arts education advocacy space for almost 20 years. And so I've been blessed to come into contact with a lot of large players and people who I've been able to gain their ear, which is great. And I'm thankful for that. But this has opened that door even more so than it ever was with me alone, right? I now have an entire organization helping me champion this mission forward, as well as contacting people at a pace that's faster than I ever could as one person. And that's incredible. And so my biggest thing is something that I would love to see happen and come to fruition during my time as Miss America is a federal standard. And right now, I think there's too many differences within different districts and states as a whole of how this funding and allocation is handled. And I think if we can get one blanket standard of this is what everyone needs to do, I think that's going to make things a lot easier, because when we start saying, well, this person can decide and this person can decide, everybody has different priorities, right? And that's valid. That's fair. But I also think it's really hard when you look at an administrator and say you get X amount of dollars and they have 75 problems in front of them. And if we are helping them, not dictating, but helping guide them of, okay, and so here's this year mark, and here's this year mark, and here's this year mark, this gets this gets this, that's going to 100% make their lives easier. But also it's ensuring that each of these pressure points are getting the attention that they need, maybe not to the extent that they require to make it to the level they need to be, but at least it's a start. And so that's a big conversation I try to have. And people ask me all the time, well, how can I help? And I'm like, be loud, because the more we talk about it, the more people who are coming to those decision makers and saying, this is an issue I care about. As someone that you're serving in your position, I care about this, whether it's for me as the student, because they have voices and we should be listening to them, or it's me, someone who went through your school district and didn't have this and it affected me in this way, or I'm a parent here and I'm seeing how it's, to the detriment of my student not having this. Being loud, I think, is one of the best things that someone can do. Advocacy, so much of it is that it is just saying proudly with your whole chest what you're fighting for, and not being afraid to tell your personal connection to it, because sometimes it's not always the prettiest. I know for me personally, it shocks a lot of people when I get down to the nitty gritty of the way and the why that the arts have impacted my life. And it's often in a way that they would never assume, just looking at the external, especially now as Miss America. And I think it's a testament to everything I say about music education and the arts and entertainment world as a whole, which is it impacts people's lives in ways that sometimes they don't even understand in the moment. And it's necessary and it's needed in so many ways. And so the biggest thing is just don't be afraid to tell people your story of why it's important to you. And I'm thankful to have been given many stages throughout this year. And I'm continuing to have them throughout the remainder of my time as Miss America to be able to do that.
So really appreciate you breaking down your story and your platform, and especially that point you just made there about telling the story. Whether it's your individual story, whether it's a story of students or others you've encountered. So what we're going to do in just a few minutes with everyone is you're going to be joining us for the live portion of the webinar, and we're going to be talking about some mechanics of how you all can actually make your own platform. So Cassie, thanks for taking some time here, and we'll time transport here, and we'll see you live in just a few minutes.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, so we want to know if you heard any takeaways in there before we get into the live portion with Cassie. Anything that resonated with you during the conversation, feel free to put it in the chat right now.
I'm going to jump in, Mark, because I so appreciated when Cassie said that, children aren't responsible for where they're born, the zip code that they have, that how do we ensure that all the children have the best education possible? I see one from Natalie, being loud and proud about sharing your story. Yes. And Lynn loved the right to a robust education, including music, and that children are owed the right to robust education, including music and arts education. Thanks, Lynn. And Tim said, very well said, would love to hear a bit about her nitty-gritty experience of how music helped her. And the importance of advocacy and just showing up, being loud, helping facilitate the programs, make it to the decision makers. Thank you. And Chris says, I love the conversation about delayed gratification that comes with music education. Not everything comes right now. That's so true. And then Teresa says, the long impact of music ed that may not be understood at the time. Being a loud advocate. Many people have mentioned being a loud advocate. Olivia says, advocating for arts for the sake of the arts. It's cool that kids involved in fine arts have better standardized test scores, but art is important for the sake of art. And and if it will only exist to serve other educational factors, it becomes replaceable. Yes, and if the test scores go down, guaranteed the arts go away then. So we can never predicate the value of an art form on some other unknown variable at that point. Yeah. Mark?
Yeah, I love the takeaways. I love the being loud. Uh,
Mhm.
that's crucial, and that's what we're going to move into talking about now. How do you create this platform? How do you create the message? So I'm going to invite Cassie in. We have now time traveled. We are both live here now. Cassie, thanks for being with us on the webinar tonight.
Hello, thank you for having me. I know I realized I wore the same shirt as when we recorded, so I don't really look like I time traveled much.
Your
But
background's different, so we'll
yeah,
go with that. Yeah. But no, thanks for doing the interview and thanks for being here with us live. And what we're going to do now is a bit of workshopping because you talked about your platform, but we want to talk about how you actually create a platform, how you did it, but how all of us can do it because we're all going to be in a position where we have to advocate for something and we have to advocate in some way. And a great way to look at it is creating your own platform. So the way we're going to do this is we have a few questions and we're going to pose the questions to all of you tuning in. And we would love for you to answer the questions as I ask them. And then I'm going to ask Cassie each of the questions for her to give her feedback. And then we'll take a look at the chat for some of yours. So let's go to the very first question. And that is, what do you want an audience to take away after they hear your platform? So, for all of you joining us in the webinar, think about that from your end and put the answers, your answer, personal answer in the chat. But Cassie, I'm going to go to you on this. What do you want an audience to take away when they're hearing your platform? Is that kind of part of your thinking when you're creating that message?
I don't know if I necessarily try to pinpoint, especially dependent on the audience because they can vary so often. I think it's more that I want people to, in the way that music often does, I want them to feel something, right? I want them to actually feel something off of what I have just said. And typically that is because it's a realization that they may not have had already of how much the arts impact them directly, right? So many people don't realize how music is so intertwined into our everyday lives and our society and the way it's a domino effect. And so, especially a lot of the time when we're talking about actually having the access to it and the funding to back that up, we're speaking to people who often are caring more about numbers than they are about the element of, like someone said in the chat, the arts existing for the sake of the arts existing, right? And so we have to point out some of those things to them. And I want them with that, with those facts in front of them, to be able to walk away feeling whether it's the shock of, oh, but I didn't actually ever think about that. Or just feeling the fact of, you know what, you're right, this does impact everyone, including myself. And I want them to either feel that passion to go out and chase this reality as well, or just to be so honest, the guilt of the fact that they haven't made it possible for our students yet nationwide.
I like that, using the guilt part. That's a
Yeah.
good one. So then I guess kind of what you're doing in a sense is you adjust your platform, you adjust your message for the audience that's in front of you.
I think you have to in this setting because we have to remind people sometimes that their voice matters. They often think that they don't have a voice or a platform to stand on just because they don't have the formality of something like a title like I've been given, right? But that's not true. And so I often, when I speak to students, it is really gearing it towards the fact that their voice can often matter even more than any of ours can. Because it's very easy to sound like the disgruntled former student who went through an educational process that they didn't enjoy, or the educator who's mad that their job might be at risk. But when it's coming from the student themselves who are shouting to the decision makers that this is something that I need, this is a necessity for me that is going to improve all of the things you want to hear, right? Like I live in New York, and for example, like 4 days ago, it was just released that only 2% of schools actually have what the state would call adequate test scores as of recent, but we have over 116,000 students without any access to arts education, and I would pose the question of how different would those numbers look if they had it. But on the more important side of that, our young people are screaming to be heard and to be seen and acknowledged. And so much of that comes from invalidation of their emotions. And when we give them this safe space to pour into that, to have that emotional regulation that the arts so often bring and teach young people how to do, we give them that safe space where they have something that they are so passionate about in the same way as their peers. They need that. But we can only say that for them so often. And so when I'm speaking to students, I often try to encourage them to feel empowered to use their voice and that the right people will listen and join in on their message. And there is power in numbers. So the more of them who are shouting that, the better. Whereas, with our decision makers, a lot of the time I've got to pull out the stats, I have to pull out the money numbers and all of that good stuff. And a lot of the time when I'm speaking to fellow educators, I feel like it's more of like a speech of empowerment and positivity of we can do this. They already know what we're fighting for. And then the general public, it's the reminder of how necessary it is to our everyday society and how it impacts even their job, even if they think it's not even possible to be affecting their job in whatever field they're in. I promise them it is, and I can often point out a tangible way that it is. So, yeah, I think you absolutely have to, and you have to know your audience before you walk in. Sometimes that's not always possible. But knowing your audience ahead of time to know how to gain their ear is going to be one of the most important things to your success when you're done.
Yeah, really appreciate that idea of thinking through all of those audiences. So we had a quite a number of answers to this question. And I know you've been following the chat. You want to share some of those?
Yeah, the first one from Natalie is to feel empowered to do something so that your message empowers, you're empowering others with the idea for them to move as well. So it's not just delivering to them, but you're also ennobling them, if you will, and that they will believe that music is connection. It banishes ignorance, it nourishes empathy, it creates community. And you've mentioned that so much about them having their voice being heard and how they can share and be a part of a community in a very unique way that they might not have in a regular classroom. Chris, then we spoke about the audience, and Chris says it's so dependent on the audience, but most importantly, everyone has power. Let's use that shared power and responsibility to help move this forward. I want to help empower others to create change. So what words do you get to find in your vocabulary, and what experiences do you get to share to really help instigate that?
Yeah, lots of good stuff. So great for all of you thinking of all of those answers. So now's your chance to do it again. We have another question for you. What is your go-to story or stories you tell to back up your platform, and why do you go to those stories? So Cassie, you kind of alluded this a little bit as you were talking about audiences, but in as you were forming your platform for Miss America and your platform now as you go out of it, do you have these go-to stories, and why have you chosen the ones you have?
Yes, and I think those are also audience dependent as well, a little bit. Um, One big story that I tell is there was a day, it actually wasn't even music related in the appearance that I was doing. But I had interacted with this family. It was this young girl. She was for the most part non-verbally autistic, and she had very little actual putting together of standard words in a flow of a sentence in terms of being able to verbally communicate. And I was sitting there and I had my crown and I had my sash and she was playing with it and she kind of just started like humming and making some musical sounds. And so I started singing some things along with her. And her mom just looked at me with tears in her eyes and she was like, she has never really communicated in this way before, where she is singing a song that she had heard. I believe if I remember, it was Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And so a song she had heard many times and was actually putting together and stringing together the lyrics of that song relatively well. And in their world, that was something that was just that they don't see that every day. Something that's so basic to see in typically your 2 or 3 year old, their 7 or 8 year old is doing that because music was just brought into that moment for her. And the way that it transcends any barrier, regardless of language, economic status, location, whatever it was able to transcend literally what is typically her presumed inability to verbally communicate in that way. And music helped bring that out in her in just what was a typical moment. And I think that's really important because it speaks to the element of music is not just there to be a learning tool or a passion project or an aid for someone's educational experience. It's literally there to help change lives, right? But in order for us to keep doing that, we have to have people who have the opportunity to decide that that's what they potentially want to do to keep creating that art in the world as the world keeps spinning, right? And so it's not just people creating billion-dollar shows and large orchestral pieces. It's people literally in the street on the concrete singing with a 7-year-old who typically cannot form words in that way. But I also think, I often share my own story. And, I grew up in a small town in southeastern Virginia. And I come from a low income family. My mom's a multi-stroke and heart attack survivor. My dad's a 100% disabled veteran. More often than not, my mom was either begging for an extension on our utilities or they were already cut off. And it was not the most typical of upbringings, especially with my peers around me in that town. And had I not had the access that I was, for whatever reason, blessed to be given by people believing and seeing in something in me from a very young age, I would not be sitting here. And I really press the point of I don't mean as Miss America or as a professional artist. I mean, I had a plan at 12. And that's just the fact of it. And I had a plan again at 19. And it was one show that saved my life. In the same way that having that access to that education within my school building at 12 saved my life. Because they were the only places in those two very hard times in my life where I felt safe and I felt understood and I felt like I had a purpose. And I am not exclusive to that story. That is something that many, many people understand. And it's not just people who then choose to turn this into their profession in some way. It's people who they decide to do something wholly not even relevant to whatever instrument that they studied or whatever choir they were in or show that they did. But it is still the thing beyond their K through 12 educational experience that gets them through day to day. And I think when we're willing to go to those places as hard as it can be sometimes and where we are open to sharing the realities of some of the more difficult times in our lives and how the arts have saved us through them, it's harder for people to rebuke those because how are they going to tell you that your lived experience and the thing that saved your life is invalid? And I think it opens their eyes a little bit more to the reality of something that oftentimes is intangible, right? We can't grab music, but we can feel it in so many ways beyond just being able to physically touch it. And um so those are my two biggest go-tos, because even when we're talking to numbers people, it's those typically are able to they're able to connect with those in a way that almost everyone has met someone who has gone through a mental health crisis at some point. Almost everyone has met a child that they love so much that may be struggling with something that's not typical. And I think it's easier when you have something that someone can connect with for them to get on board with what your mission is.
Incredibly powerful stories, both of them that you just told. And I want to, before we kick it to Anna, talk a little bit what's in the chat. I just want to kind of dissect how you told the stories as a lesson here. So you beautifully tell these stories of, we'll talk about the one of your life. You beautifully tell this story of your life and how it happened to you, and then you're able to zoom out and say, but I know it's not just me. I know there are other people in this same situation. So if I was the recipient of this and look what it did for me, there is no reason that others should not be the recipient of this. And I think that is just a wonderful, incredible way to structure what you're doing to help make that point. So thank you for those both incredibly powerful stories.
Beautiful point on that, Mark, because yes, we can take it to ourselves, but then it stops right there. The moment we can tie it from ourselves to all others, I think that states a larger case for it as well. And to for us to assume that this does exist in other people, this need does exist in other people. I'm going to lift up two thoughts from the chat, and one is from Olivia. How she had said her chosen family was found in the arts. I'm sure many of us here have found that as well. As someone who felt outside and othered growing up, I was loved, accepted, and valued in my choir. It's why I'm a choir teacher, and it brings me joy to see my little flock of black sheep each day. I resonate with that completely, Olivia. My space was really trying to be that room where everyone can find themselves because of how I felt. Yeah, well said. And Natalie said, as someone who grew up at homeschooled, I entered public education for the first time in high school. There was not a single familiar face, and I felt so alone. But joining my high school's choir program changed all of that for me. Since then, I've earned a Bachelor of Music. I'm a private music educator, sharing my love for the arts with students of all ages. Yes, because your family becomes all of those folks in that ensemble. It's so powerful. You had mentioned earlier, Cass, about this concept of community, and that we are really inviting people to take their individual self and become a part of a community through such a powerful medium of sound. Yeah. Mark, back at you. We got another question.
Yeah, we have another question, and again, we'll ask all of you to answer this in the chat. And this is a bit mechanics. So, I'm curious, for the mechanics of how you think through these things, Cassie, because I'm sure as Miss America, there's some media training involved. You're talking to media, you're doing appearances. And those are lessons that are good for all of us in so many ways whenever we're presenting to a policymaker, to a school board, to a principal, to parents, whoever it might be. So, kind of if you could talk us through the mechanics of, how do you actually share your platform with others? Are you actually thinking ahead, like, okay, I want to make sure that I'm doing it as a soundbite, or as we talked about the story, I want to make sure when I tell the story, I'm bringing these points in, and are you thinking of all of those things ahead of time? Is kind of tying back to the first question as, all right, we know what the audience is, and then the second question, we know what the story is. Or, what are the mechanics of how you think through these things?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the audience, right? And I'm very lucky in this setting to typically know exactly who my audience is going to be, and also, their chosen deliverables of what they would like the outcomes to be in terms of what I'm speaking about. So sometimes that will guide what I'm saying. But for the most part, I mean, yes, there are always some sound bites I try to hit on. I think some of the bigger ones that are more emotionally driven, just every child deserves access to self-expression, not just those that can afford it. Arts education builds discipline, empathy, resilience, and courage, things of that nature. But when we want to stick to more of the statistically driven sound bites, there are things like students who are highly engaged in the arts are five times less likely to drop out of school and have a 20% higher graduation rate. And then same thing with low income students who participate in the arts. They are 2 times more likely to graduate compared to other low income peers without arts access. Schools with robust arts programmings report fewer disciplinary referrals. So kind of able to grab onto um, some of those statistics and sound bites that those decision makers are really going to want to hear, while then filling the rest of it out with the things that are going to be impactful beyond that to the audience that I'm speaking to. I think it's important to still always put some of those in there. Also, in the world of Miss America, yes, we're always filming. We're always wanting to. We can't put a 30-minute keynote on social media usually, so they're wanting to grab and this part here, putting it there, so that way people are able to tune in. They're like, oh, I didn't know that. They go either look something up or they go and try to find the whole video online somewhere on YouTube. So I am mindful of that. I also sometimes will try to frame things that force people to then go and find the rest of it to figure out what in the world I'm talking about. I always think that's a pretty good tactic in terms of the social media angle. But when it comes to people actually hearing what I'm saying, I don't typically write out my whole speeches. I bullet point my speeches, and I often will frame how the trajectory of the speech is going off of the actual visual reaction that I'm getting from the crowd. I think it's okay to take the opportunity to change directions when you are actively speaking to people, because if it's not landing, then what's the point of going with what you had originally planned, right? So always have a backup plan in terms of what you are going to speak about, because some people are not going to respond well to great levels of passion. They don't want to hear that. They want to hear the numbers. They want to hear logistically speaking. Other people, that's great. They want to see that you care about it, right? So it's having that backup plan, having a plan, knowing your audience, but if for some reason the audience is not hitting with it that day, having a different direction that you can go.
I love all of that. Like that is all like that is really practical advice for all of us. And you and I have talked a number of times here in the past few months, and one of the things that has come up that you talk about is like this legacy of Miss America and all of these women that have come before you, and of course they've all shared messages. But you just said something that was this light bulb to me. Miss America in 1980 did not have to think about social media. And so as you're crafting these messages, that is what we all should be thinking about too, that social media angle. What's the clip that we can use, or what's the quote that we can use? So that's another wonderful takeaway. And any takeaways from the chat?
I'm going to connect that to what Marcia had said. The challenge is having the platform to share these powerful stories. And you can see these stories on social media from time to time as those who were impacted by being in music while in school realize years later that it was a game changer in their life's trajectory. Yes, very much. So, Cassie, I got to ask you, do you search for certain areas or places to speak, to share your message? Or they right now they're just coming to you saying, please talk to us? But are there some places you definitely want to go talk to about this?
Both. So big for me, unfortunately, because every state is so different right now. So like a big goal for me with New York specifically is Governor Kathy Hochul is responsible in terms of setting the educational budget and then handing it off to the educational department to then be dispersed down to our administrators and school boards to then decide how it's going to go. And so I would love to be able to speak with her. We are in the works right now of having conversations. Conversations have been started. Meetings are attempting to be put on the table, but she's a very busy woman, so I do not blame her right now in the state of New York. But really trying to get that back as a core subject in the statewide curriculum, because it's not currently for the state of New York. And so in circumstances like that, yes, I'm doing the reaching out. I'm wanting to speak with them. I am also often reaching out to underfunded school districts. And if I know I'm going to be in a town or near a town where it's reasonable for us to be able to commute there for something else that's already paying the money for me to be in that location. I want to be able to piggyback that to, if nothing else, if I can't actually speak to decision makers at that time, I want to go in and I've curated a STEAM masterclass that I do that I can modify K through 12. And so I often will reach out to those schools and see if there's time within their day while I'm there to be able to give one of those master classes to those students to be able to have even sometimes their only access they've ever had within their school to something arts related. But on the flip of that, in terms of, giving speeches or things of that nature, it's often they're reaching out to us and having me do that. There were some key players that I, handed over my list of things I would like to do to the Nationals organization, and they've been working through that, which I've been very grateful for, to be able to plug in some of those. But in terms of decision makers in schools, it's usually me reaching out to them. Sometimes schools will, but also often there's the fact of they're already underfunded. So the immediate assumption is, oh, we're probably paying for Miss America. But a precedent that I set first week of being Miss America is no school will ever pay for me to be there. And so I don't care whether they're a funded district or not. They should not need to do that. So we often try to work it out to find someone else essentially to be the fiscal sponsor to bring me there to do something else, and then make sure that we can fit in as many schools as possible. And then really awesome opportunities like this where, we're reached out to and I'm able to connect and be a part.
Thank you. I'd say what really resonated with me was not only your impactful, empathic story, but also the sound clips of data that you knew exactly what you were given at the same time. And that's so important for us to remember. It's a little both. Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Cassie, we can't thank you enough for talking with us tonight, doing the recorded interview, and then coming on with us live. I will throw out just a little plug. Cassie was on PMEA's podcast, Pennsylvania Music Educators Association podcast, back in December. It's called Take Note. You can find it on YouTube and on all the podcast apps. Go there because that conversation was completely different than this conversation that we had. So there's a whole lot of other things that you can learn about her. So I just want to thank you again, Cassie, for being here and for being such a wonderful champion of arts education and sharing your stories with us tonight.
Well, thank you all so much. It brings me so much joy to be in spaces like this, right? Everyone's here for a shared mission, and so anything I can do, especially with all of y'all together, to push that forward and say it even louder, I will absolutely always be there. So thank you.
And we'll take you up on that. Thanks again. And I'm going to turn things over to Bob.
Hey, thank you, Mark, and thanks, Cassie. That was absolutely incredible. And as a data geek, you spoke my language there. So we're going to talk about what you can do and how does this all relate to you and what you can do in your own community. So first, you have to understand who you are in your role with music education and what is your sphere of influence. Think about your job title, or you as a parent or a school board member, a community leader, or a taxpayer or former student. Your sphere is bigger than you think. Other parents, social media followers, your state legislators' offices, local media, your PTA. The point is, everyone has a platform, even if it doesn't feel like one. Second point is know your audience. She was talking about this earlier. A school board member cares about different things than a state legislator or a superintendent. Match your language to their priorities. Budget people need a return on investment. Equity people need access to data. Curriculum people need standards alignment. A quick tip is to find out what they've said publicly about the issue before you walk in and meet with them or have a conversation with them. The third item is identify a need or state the value and impact of what you want to state. Lead with the problem, not the program. Lead with something like 20% of our schools have 0 music teachers. That hits harder than music is important. Frame the value in terms that they will care about, the audience will care about. Is it attendance? Is it graduation rates? Is it school climates? Is it the intrinsic value of the arts? Is it workforce readiness? Is it student engagement? And then be specific to your community. State and local data always beats national stats. Data is most powerful the closest it is to the consumer of that data. So keep that in mind when you're presenting. The fourth thing is, share a story that connects. Those two stories that Cassie just shared with us, those really connected. They really resonated with us. So it's important to have a well thought out story that you can share. One student, one teacher, one moment. Keep it personal, keep it brief, just like she did here tonight. And the best stories make the data human. Say this person was just one of 12,000 students in our state who don't have access to music in their schools. That when you can connect the data to a story, that makes it more compelling. As a matter of fact, stories give permission to care, data gives permission to act. Point five is to identify the data you will include in your message. Pick 2 or 3 data points, max. Don't overwhelm. Use data that creates contrast or surprise. Access gaps between districts, demographic disparities, trend lines. Point them to your state's arts education data project dashboards as a resource that they can use themselves to find interesting data points on the community or schools. And also, we have the Carl B. Arts Education Advocacy Assistant that we'll have the link for later that you can use to help you in shaping the stories. And the last point is determine the best way to share your message. Match the channel to the moment. Whether it's testimony, an op-ed, social media, one-on-one meetings, email, you have to understand a 2-minute public comment requires a different approach than a 30-minute meeting. So determine the best way to share your stories. And always have a clear ask. Don't just raise awareness, request a specific action. And the most important point of all of this is remember this equation: story plus data plus ask equals action. Story plus data plus ask equals action. And I'll turn it back over to our hosts.
Thanks. James, you want to forward the next slide? Let Bob see those words. Yes. And you know what? Even if you don't have an ask, it could be a thank you as well. So some thank yous there. So we are going to, yes, thanks. Go ahead to the next one. Thanks, James. We're going to continue with this webinar. We're coming to the closing, top of the hour here, and we always are sharing some of the celebrations that are going on nationally. And this is coming from California, and this is a direct result of relationships. But California Music Educators was asked at the end of January to present at the Senate Ed Committee, the Assembly Ed Committee in California, on behalf of Prop 28 to share what's really going on. And we had been collecting data for the past 3 years. How's it going in your district? What's happening? And up until even this 2 weeks ago, we were collecting data and collecting people's stories. And then the Assembly Ed Committee came to us and said, can you please speak on behalf of arts education with other organizations at the state level? So our current president went, and their middle there, there's Chad Zillinger, he's in the middle. And to his immediate right, or to our left, is Al Muratsuchi. He is the Assembly Ed Committee chair. And he has become a friend of California Music Educators Association. And to the right, you will see the other folks that were speaking. But I want to come back to and reiterate, we were asked because we had created a relationship with the Assembly Ed Committee and with Al Muratsuchi. And we've written him many letters. Thank you. Hello, look what's going on. He knew to reach out to us, to invite us to speak on behalf of music education of the state. So relationships matter even when they're collecting data. And then I'm handing it off to Amanda.
Thanks, Anne. Well, I'm really excited to share some breaking news from the other side of the country that actually happened just this week. Yesterday, the Virginia Senate approved HB 478 that would create a diploma seal for excellence in fine arts. The bill had already passed through the House, so now it just needs to go to the governor for her signature. And as a proud choir mom, I'm going to be really excited to see that diploma seal when my son graduates with the class of 2029. So it really hits home for me too. I will say also in Virginia today, they were successful in killing a bill on class size reduction that they felt would really have an adverse impact on sixth grade instrument ensembles. And so the VMEA leadership team. They have formed really good relationships with their legislators, done a lot of that work. I really have to shout out to Michelle Milligan, who's the advocacy chair in Virginia right now. She also reached out to NAFME for support. We do have a grassroots advocacy tool that we can share with state music educator associations and arts coalitions across the country. So if you have legislation you're supporting or want to oppose, in the case of the Virginia Seal, they actually had almost 500 advocates reach out to their legislators in support of that bill. So it was really great to see that support from across the state. I'll mention too, just this month, a similar bill was also introduced in the Louisiana House Education Committee. So great to see the work doing there. A number of our state MEAs have been holding music advocacy days. You can see which ones already took place in 2026. And then we have a number that are still on the calendar for later this spring. So we can share some information about our advocacy leadership force. You can find out who the contact person is in your state. And if you want to get engaged in any of the state level advocacy, those are the people to talk to.
Thank you, Amanda. And now as we wind up, we are going to look at our last couple slides. Oh, Amanda, we have
Yeah, I can continue
sorry.
just
Yeah, please do.
wishing
Please
all
do.
of you happy Music in Our Schools month. I think we've shared their well, that QR code will take you to our MIOSM page on the NAFME website. There are a lot of resources there. There are lesson plans, but there's also a lot of advocacy resources as well. If you want to get a resolution or proclamation at the state or local level through your school board, all of those resources are there for you. I will also put in the link, we have a campaign at the federal level in support of a congressional resolution to support Music in Our Schools Month that will be reintroduced tomorrow by Congresswoman Velasquez from New York and Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey. Even though they're being introduced tomorrow, we still want to build support for that legislation. They also are reintroducing the Guarantee Access to Arts and Music Education Act. So we will share that for you as well. And then I think the final slide from me is another celebration for Music in Our Schools Month. NAFME, NAM, and the CMA Foundation will be holding an event on Capitol Hill in person on Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, but we are also going to be streaming live on the NAFME Facebook page. So we have a great panel with representatives from higher ed, district art administrator, music teacher of excellence, and then one of our collegiate students from George Mason University. And again, Congresswoman Velasquez is supposed to be joining us for that event as well. So would love for all of you to tune in.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, James, here we go. We have upcoming events. We have one more webinar this year, and it's going to be in April. So please join us. You can scan that QR code, or you can catch it from the chat. April 7th is Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific and 7 p.m. Eastern. Please check out our Music is Education website along with the Carl B app or a bot that helps with music education advocacy. It is such a great tool, helps you actually maybe create and write your platform with all of your stories. And then check out YouTube, the YouTube channel. We are hosting all of these incredible webinars that we've had this entire academic year. James, next slide, please. And we just want to say thank you to the folks that are in this space that attended. Real huge shout out to Miss America, to Cassie Donegan, and James Weaver as well from Music for All, and his entire team that are here, because we are using the registration sites and we are connected on this webinar platform because of them. So thank you to every single organization that's present, to all of you for all that you do for music and arts education across the country. And we hope that you have a wonderful March. Mark, thank you. Great webinar. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody, or evening rather.